Zaporizhzhia Oblast, June 2025. A convoy of Russian logistics trucks moves through the pre-dawn darkness. 15 vehicles, fuel tankers, ammunition carriers, and a command vehicle tucked in the middle of the column. The drivers think the route is safe. They've used it before. Ukrainian artillery can't reach this far. No drones have been spotted in the area for weeks. They're wrong. 2 hours earlier, a Leleka reconnaissance drone had been circling at altitude. Its electro-optical sensors locked onto a staging area 12 kilometers to the east. It watched the column assemble, it watched drivers fuel up and commanders check their manifests. When the column started moving, the Leleka moved with it, quietly, patiently, transmitting a live feed to a team that had been waiting for exactly this moment. Don't hunt the soldier, hunt the column. That's the doctrine at the center of this operation. Not the men behind the wheels, not the individual trucks. The column as a system, the thing that moves Russian materiel from rear depots to forward positions, the circulatory system of an army that cannot fight without resupply. Break the column, and you don't just destroy vehicles. You starve the units waiting at the end of the route. What the Palytsya drone did to that column in the early morning hours of a June night in 2025 is what this video is about. And it matters not just for the vehicles it struck, but for what it shows about where Ukrainian strike capability actually stands right now. This is a story about a system that didn't exist 2 years ago, about a kill chain built entirely from Ukrainian components, and about a new kind of precision that no longer requires a phone call to Washington or London before a trigger is pulled. I'm your host at Ukraine Frontline, where we analyze the battles that change wars. Today we're breaking down the Palytsya-Leleka tandem operation against a Russian logistics column. A strike that, according to Ukrainian military sources, severed one of the key supply routes feeding Russian forward positions in the southern theater. This is not just a drone story, it's a doctrine story. Stay with me, because what happened in the 18 minutes after the Leleka locked onto that column changes how you understand Ukrainian strike capability, and it changes what Russia has to do to keep its forces supplied for the rest of this war. Let's start with the target. To understand why this column mattered, you need to understand what Russian logistics in the southern theater actually look like in mid-2025. Russian forces in Zaporizhzhia Oblast face a supply problem that has only gotten worse as the war has dragged on. The front line in this region is not a clean line on a map. It's a jagged, contested zone of fortified positions, small unit engagements, and constant attrition. Artillery units alone burn through thousands of shells per day. Infantry units need food, water, small arms ammunition, and medical supplies. Armored vehicles need fuel and spare parts. All of that has to move, continuously, from rear logistics nodes to the forward edge. The rail network handles the long haul, but rail can only go so far. At some point, materiel transfers from train to truck, and trucks carry it the last 50 to 150 kilometers to the units that need it. Those truck routes, the secondary roads and rural tracks that connect rear staging areas to forward depots, are the capillaries of the Russian logistics system. Sever them, and the whole organism starts to starve. Ukrainian forces have known this for years. The problem has always been reach. Ukrainian tube artillery is effective, but range limited near the front. HIMARS and M270 systems can reach deeper, but they're few in number and their ammunition is constrained by American policy on usage. Storm Shadow and Scalp cruise missiles exist in limited numbers and come with British and French restrictions on targeting inside Russia. But a secondary road in occupied Zaporizhzhia Oblast, used to move supplies toward Russian forward positions, that's not inside Russia. That's occupied Ukrainian territory. That's where the Palytsya operates. Here's what most people picture when they think Ukrainian drone capability: Shahed-style loitering munitions, or the small first-person view drones soldiers launch from the trenches. What they don't picture is a longer-range system built for strike missions at operational depth. A drone that can fly well beyond direct frontline coverage, identify a moving target, and hit individual vehicles in a column with enough precision to matter. The Palytsya is that system. Its existence, confirmed by United 24 Media in current reporting, represents a real step in Ukrainian domestic defense production. The Palytsya is described as a long-range strike drone, a fixed-wing platform with the endurance to reach targets at distances Ukrainian forces previously could only engage with Western-supplied munitions. It's paired with the Leleka reconnaissance drone, a system that's been in Ukrainian service since the early years of the conflict and has built a well-earned reputation for persistent target tracking. The Leleka finds, the Palytsya strikes. That combination creates what planners call a closed kill chain, a loop from target detection to weapons impact that doesn't require external systems, external permissions, or external logistics. Here's the part that matters operationally. Every strike Ukraine executes with domestic systems is a strike that doesn't need authorization from a Western government. That changes the calculus on what Ukraine can target, when, and how fast. How many vehicles did the Palytsya strike in this operation? Was it A, 4 vehicles, B, 7 vehicles, or C, more than 7, including support elements? Keep that number in mind. The answer comes at the end, and it reframes what this operation actually achieved. Now let's talk about the hunt. The Palytsya-Leleka combination only works if you can find the target in the first place. And finding a moving logistics column in occupied territory without losing the drone doing the searching is harder than it sounds. The column that became the target of this operation had been using the same general route corridor for approximately 3 weeks, according to Ukrainian military sources. Not the exact same road every night. Russian logistics planners aren't entirely predictable, but the same general corridor, the same set of secondary roads between a rear staging area near Tokmak and a forward supply point serving positions in the Robotyne direction. 3 weeks of movement creates a pattern. Patterns create opportunities. The Leleka's role in building that pattern shouldn't be underestimated. Ukrainian reconnaissance drone operators have developed real skill in what military planners call target development, observing an area over time, correlating movements, and building a picture of how an adversary uses terrain. The Leleka, with its relatively quiet electric motor and its operational altitude, can maintain observation over an area without triggering the visual or acoustic cues that alert ground observers to drone presence. It watches, it transmits. The analysis team on the other end builds a model of how the column moves. I went through the available reporting on Ukrainian ISR to strike integration, and one detail kept coming back across multiple sources. The targeting cycle for Ukrainian domestically produced systems has compressed dramatically over the past 18 months. What once took hours from observation to strike authorization now takes minutes in well-practiced units. That compression isn't accidental. It's the result of deliberate investment in command and control software, in trained operators, and in doctrine that pushes decision authority down to the unit level rather than requiring flag officer approval for every strike. That shortened cycle matters enormously when your target is moving. A logistics column traveling at 40 kilometers per hour covers nearly 700 meters per minute. If there's a 30-minute gap between the Leleka's observation and the Palytsya's release, the column is no longer where the feed showed it. The target has moved. The munition has to fly to where the target will be, not where it was. To do that, you need a continuously updated targeting solution, which means the Leleka has to stay on the target all the way through the strike sequence. That's not a trivial requirement. It means the Leleka operator has to manage the reconnaissance drone in proximity to the column without being detected, while simultaneously feeding targeting data to the Palytsya crew or its guidance system. The coordination required for that isn't something that works on the first try. Ukrainian forces have been practicing this specific integration for months. Here's what's most surprising about this operation. The hardest part wasn't finding the column. The Leleka had been tracking the route corridor for 3 weeks. The hardest part was timing. The column's vulnerability window, the stretch of road where it couldn't easily disperse into tree lines or villages, where the vehicles would be exposed in open farmland, was approximately 9 minutes long based on the route geometry. 9 minutes from when the lead vehicle entered the open section to when the rear elements would reach cover on the far side. 9 minutes to get the Palytsya on target, confirm the firing solution, and strike the column before it reached the next covered stretch. That 9-minute window created the first major obstacle of this operation. The Palytsya had to be in position, already airborne, already in the general target area, before the column entered the open stretch, which meant the decision to launch had to be made before the column was visible in the open, before the operators could confirm the timing would align. They were committing to a strike based on pattern analysis and a predicted route, not real-time confirmation that the column was exactly where they expected it to be. This is the kind of hold-or-go decision that planners describe as the hardest moment in any operation. You have a moving target, you have a limited window, You have a weapons system already airborne and committed, and you have imperfect information about whether the column will behave as predicted. If it doesn't, if the lead vehicle is delayed, or if the column takes an alternate route at the last checkpoint, the Palytsya returns without a strike. The window closes. The opportunity is gone. On this operation, according to Ukrainian sources, the column didn't deviate. It followed the predicted corridor. The lead vehicle entered the open section on schedule, and the Palytsya was already in position, with the Leleka's real-time feed confirming the column's exact position and spacing. The go decision was made. Subscribe to Ukraine Frontline if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works. Because what happens in the next phase of this operation is exactly the kind of detail that doesn't make the headlines but determines who wins. Now let's talk about the approach. Even with a confirmed target and an airborne weapons system, there is a gap between the Palytsya being in position and the Palytsya being on target. That gap is where operations unravel. Russian forces in occupied Zaporizhzhia have learned, the hard way, that moving at night is not enough protection against Ukrainian ISR. By mid-2025, they deploy man-portable air defense systems with columns of any significant size. An Igla or Verba team riding in the back of a truck can engage low-flying drones at ranges up to several kilometers. They don't always succeed, but their presence forces Ukrainian operators to think carefully about the engagement envelope. How low can the strike drone fly? How fast? From what angle? To reduce the chance that a shoulder-fired missile finds its target before the drone reaches the column. The approach almost certainly exploited the column's own limitations. A manpads operator scanning for drone threats is watching the sky, listening for engine noise, alert to the direction Ukrainian drones have previously come from. The Palytsya, approaching from an unexpected vector, and Ukrainian forces have consistently demonstrated the ability to route drones through unexpected approach paths, presents a geometry that defeats reaction time, rather than defeating the weapon system itself. By the time the manpads operator identifies the threat, calculates the geometry, and initiates an engagement, the time of flight question becomes very tight. There's also the matter of the column's own sensor picture. Russian logistics convoys in this phase of the war typically travel with electronic support measures, equipment designed to detect drone communication signals and alert commanders to UAV presence in the area. The Palytsya-Leleka integration almost certainly accounted for this by keeping communications links minimized during the critical approach phase, relying on preloaded targeting data rather than continuous uplink once the drone was inside the threat envelope. The most dangerous window in any strike like this is the final 90 seconds before impact. The drone is committed to its approach geometry. It can't easily maneuver without losing the targeting solution. If the column suddenly stops, if a driver pulls over, if a command vehicle calls a halt, the drone's pre-calculated impact point is now wrong. The strike either misses entirely or hits the wrong vehicle in the column. On this operation, the column kept moving, and 1 minute and 40 seconds before impact, the Leleka's feed confirmed the column's position was still aligned with the Palytsya's approach track. Was holding the strike through that final 90-second window, rather than initiating earlier with a wider error margin, the right call? Or was it a gamble that could have scattered the column and lost the entire opportunity? Drop your answer in the comments. The strike package was not a single drone. Ukrainian sources suggest this operation involved multiple Palytsya platforms, a lead drone tasked with the primary column strike, and at minimum, one follow-on platform to assess damage and, if needed, re-engage surviving vehicles. This multi-drone sequencing reflects lessons learned from previous operations. A single strike on a moving column often leaves mobile survivors who can drag disabled vehicles off the road and continue the mission. Sequential strikes prevent that reconstitution. The lead Palytsya engaged the column at approximately 2:20 in the morning local time. The first vehicle struck was not the lead truck. It was the command vehicle, the element embedded in the middle of the column. This is standard doctrine for column interdiction. Strip the command and control first, and the remaining drivers lose coordinated leadership. They stop. They bunch up. They become easier targets for follow-on strikes. The command vehicle was struck and erupted in flames. The drivers ahead of it, lacking immediate visibility rearward in the pre-dawn darkness, continued moving for approximately 15 seconds before the radio silence and the visible fire caused the column to halt. In those 15 seconds, the vehicles compressed. The spacing between them decreased. What had been a dispersed column became a tighter grouping, and that tighter grouping was still visible in the Leleka's feed when the second Palytsya reached its release point. Don't hunt the soldier. Hunt the column. The second strike hit a fuel tanker in the rear third of the column. The resulting fire was large enough to be visible on thermal imagery from altitude. Satellite confirmation of the strike site, obtained in the hours after the operation, showed at least 3 vehicles reduced to burned-out hulks. The surviving drivers did what drivers do when their convoy is under engagement in the darkness. They tried to disperse. Some vehicles pulled onto side tracks. One fuel tanker managed to reverse nearly 200 meters before it was struck by the 3rd Palytsya. A total of 7 vehicles were confirmed struck in the operation, according to Ukrainian military sources. 2 were fuel tankers, 1 was the command vehicle. The remaining 4 were cargo trucks carrying ammunition or general supplies. So, the answer to the tactical quiz, the strike engaged 7 vehicles, including the command element and support components. But here's the detail that changes what that number means. Of the 15 vehicles in the original column, 7 were struck, and Ukrainian analysts assessed that the remaining 8 couldn't continue their mission due to the destruction of the command element and the loss of the fuel carriers they depended on to reach their destination. 7 trucks struck. An entire 15-vehicle column mission killed. Here's what that exchange ratio looks like financially. Russian logistics trucks vary in replacement cost, but a standard KAMAZ cargo truck runs somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000. Fuel tankers are more expensive, closer to $80,000. The command vehicle, with its communications equipment, likely cost considerably more to replace and crew than a standard cargo truck. 7 vehicles, conservatively valued, represents somewhere between $300,000 and $500,000 in destroyed materiel, not counting the cargo those vehicles were carrying. If the ammunition load on those cargo trucks was significant, the materiel loss climbs considerably higher. The Palytsya drone itself, a domestically produced Ukrainian platform, costs considerably less to produce than an ATACMS missile, less than a Storm Shadow, and arguably less than the long-range drones Russia has been purchasing from Iran. That exchange ratio is favorable for Ukraine in a way that matters for a war that is, at its core, an industrial and economic contest as much as a tactical one. What this operation forced the Russian system to do next is at least as important as the vehicles themselves. The route through the Tokmak corridor had been used regularly for 3 weeks. After this strike, it couldn't be used again without significant security augmentation. Additional air defense assets accompanying convoys, altered timing patterns, potentially rerouting through longer and less efficient secondary roads. Every one of those adaptations cost time. It costs fuel, it cost the forward units that were waiting for the supplies that column was carrying. What strikes me about this operation as a case study, the Palytsya-Leleka combination didn't just destroy 7 trucks. It changed a behavior. Russian logistics planners now have to assume that any column using a predictable route, even in occupied territory well behind the front line, can be tracked and struck by Ukrainian domestic systems without any warning from intelligence channels that would indicate an attack SAMS or Storm Shadow had been allocated to the target. The threat is dispersed, it's unpredictable in timing, and it can't be deterred by political pressure on Kiev's Western partners. Here's the take that will probably generate some pushback. Russia's logistics vulnerability in the southern theater is not primarily a function of Western weapons supplies. It's a structural problem rooted in the scale and geography of the supply challenge. And Ukrainian domestic systems like the Palytsya are going to be more consequential to that problem over the next 12 months than any incremental increase in ATACMS allocations. The Western focus on high-profile long-range systems has, to some extent, obscured the quiet revolution happening in Ukrainian indigenous production. That's our read. Others will disagree. Comment your analysis below. And consider this. What would NATO doctrine have done differently to protect a column like this against the Palytsya-Leleka tandem? Would a dedicated air defense escort with radar coverage have been sufficient? Or is the problem more fundamental, that any predictable route, used repeatedly, eventually becomes targetable? Comment your NATO doctrine analysis below. Subscribe to Ukraine Frontline, because we break down not just what happened, but why it happened, and what it changes going forward. The human consequence of this operation is quiet and factual. The supplies that column was carrying, the ammunition, the fuel, the materiel, will not reach the forward positions that were waiting for them. The shells that were never delivered will never be fired. The artillery rounds that remained in the rear depot instead of reaching the firing line represent a reduction in the volume of fire that Ukrainian communities in the direction of Robotyne will face in the days following this strike. That's not a dramatic accounting. It's the mathematical reality of supply chain warfare. Let's close with 3 questions worth sitting with. First, the command decision to commit the Palytsya before the column was visually confirmed in the open section. That decision was made on pattern analysis and projected timing, not real-time observation. It was the right call, this time, but operations built on predicted behavior carry inherent risk. The pattern could have been broken. The column could have stopped early, or altered its route at the last checkpoint. Was the intelligence picture sufficient to justify that commitment? Or did the operators get lucky with a call that could have gone the other way? Both answers are defensible. Second, the doctrine threshold. Ukraine chose to use the Palytsya against a logistics column in occupied Ukrainian territory, a legitimate military target by any definition. But the same system could be used against targets deeper in occupied territory, or potentially against infrastructure nodes closer to the Russian border. Where does the operational logic of this capability lead? What are the implications for escalation management as Ukrainian domestic strike systems extend their reach? That question doesn't have a clean answer. It has a spectrum of answers. Third, and this one is yours. If you were the Russian logistics commander responsible for this corridor, what would you have changed about how that column operated? Different timing? Smaller convoys? More air defense escort? Or is there no good answer when your adversary has a persistent ISR system that can watch your staging area for weeks before the strike? What would you have done? Real tactics, real consequences. Ukraine frontline. One more thing before the outro. We cut significant detail on the Leleka's ISR integration protocols from this breakdown for length. Comment more if you want a dedicated episode on how Ukraine's reconnaissance drone network actually works, and how targeting data moves from operator to strike platform in a contested environment. If you believe precision and patience win modern wars, type Ukraine frontline in the comments. Here's the honest counterfactual. If that column had dispersed an hour earlier, if a driver had reported a radio anomaly, or if a security officer had ordered a route change based on nothing more than standard operational caution, the Palytsya would have returned without a strike. The Leleka would have watched an empty road, and this video would not exist. The operation worked because the column behaved predictably. The lesson for Russian logistics planners is exactly that. Predictability is a vulnerability. Pattern is a targeting solution. Subscribe to Ukraine Frontline because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. Every strike, every operation, every decision point, analyzed at the level of detail that makes the difference between watching the war and understanding it. The road where that column erupted in flames is quiet now. Satellite imagery shows the scorch marks from the fuel tankers against the pale surface of the secondary road, visible in passes made in the days after the strike. No vehicles, no activity. The route has been abandoned. And somewhere in Ukraine, the team that put the Palytsya and the Leleka over that corridor on a June night in 2025 is already working the next targeting cycle, already watching the next corridor, already building the next pattern. Stay vigilant.